so glad that you are here with us. My name is Ashley. I oversee and run Creative Tides Ministry, which is a nonprofit ministry that exists to build church-to-church partnerships for worship pastors, worship leaders, worship teams, tech teams, to build up that community so that we can get in a room like this together and pick each other's brain and have community. And then we also exist to train individual creatives, whether you're a musician or an artist or a sound tech. We offer free resources so that we can train you up and you can serve either the church or somewhere else in your local context. So this is completely for you, and we lean into the local experts in our community so that you can continue not just connecting with each other, but the people who we have facilitate these workshops. This is for you to learn and grow and then connect both here as well as later on. So this happens right now primarily through quarterly workshops. So this is our first one of this year. Our next one is going to be in May on the topic of lighting, programming, lighting design, all things lighting. And that will be at Northwest Christian Church in Newberg. So I have the date. It's May 17th. I've got the date and time, address on here. And then I'm going to pass this around from table to table. But one of the ways that we can host the conversation this morning as well as post-event is through Discord. So if you're already on our Discord group from a previous event, there is a room under the tech category called audio engineering. So we're going to hang out in that room of the Discord today. And if you think of questions as we go, type them into that Discord group, and I'm going to be monitoring that and collecting kind of common questions, and we'll host a panel after all three of our facilitators have presented this morning. If you're not on Discord, this would be a great time for you to join Discord. So it's free. It's just kind of a group messaging platform. So you can scan the QR code to download the app, scan the QR code to get connected to our Creative Tides Discord. And then there's a couple different categories: tech, worship, guitar, different groups, but we're going to hang out in the audio group today. So I will pass this. We'll go this way and just pass this sign around. So our first speaker today is Chris Hahn. He is on staff with me. I actually am the worship pastor at Red Hills Church in Newberg, and Chris Hahn is on staff with me as production director. And so he's going to kick us off this morning talking through fundamentals and basics of sound. So if you'd help me welcome him this morning.
Good morning, everybody. We have more people come than I anticipated, so this is awesome that see everybody show up. So as Ashley said, if we're trying to not only provide these resources for people, but also to develop a community. That's like a big goal, is to develop a community of connections, whether it's sound or lighting, or if you're a vocalist or you play an instrument. We're trying to just develop a way for everybody to get connected with each other. And so, for an example, one of the ways we've done that already is Ashley got in contact with Kyla, and then Kyla needed a drummer at her church, and so I was able to plug in and help out for a couple Wednesdays. So that's the kind of vibe that we're trying to, is the big C vibe. We're trying to connect with each other and try to figure out where we can get people plugged in to get experience and to also to serve in other spaces. So, so fundamentals of sound and audio concept. A little bit about me. I'm a drummer. I've been a drummer for 33 years. I've been a studio engineer for about 23 years. Played in I'm a Gen Xer, so I played in a bunch of bands in the 90s, and then after playing in bands and recording and stuff, I got really interested in studio technology and sound, and ended up going to school for that. Out of school, I came back, started a recording studio, and then ended up getting plugged into a church. That ended up turning into a volunteer opportunity, which turned into a stipend opportunity, which turned into part-time, and then it turned into full-time. So that was my pathway. That's not an uncommon pathway I see for other individuals who end up getting into media arts through their own personal experience and have an opportunity to serve, and then that serving opportunity turns into something more substantial. So, and then as a result of getting plugged into that community, I was also able to plug into local nonprofits and other parachurch partners that are in the area, helping to take the kind of skills that I would bring to to my ministry experience and bring those into to nonprofits and help them tell stories and help them amplify their voices and things like that. So I did a TEDx presentation in like 2010. That was pretty fun. I did we built an 8-foot room that had an interactive lighting and audio and reactive MIDI experience that you could go in and try to make sound and music without having to know anything about sound and music. That was kind of the point, was to try to build an experience that you could go do something without actually having any experience doing it. And so my presentation was future audio concepts and how to bridge the gap between technology and music for people who don't have the natural drive or gifting to get into those spaces and stuff. So that was pretty fun. So I'm a media producer too. I in addition to doing studio recording, I also do podcasting, also do video. All of that kind of falls into the umbrella of what I consider digital storytelling. So they're all just digital tools to help us do what we do, which is to tell stories, either tell testimonies about people or tell a story of a business or a nonprofit, or tell the story about how somebody came to Christ, or how, in this case, amplifying the voice of the pastor so that he, as he shares the gospel, we can clearly communicate the gospel. So, and I was born in 1985, so I was like 10 years old, born in 1975. I was 10 years old in 1985, which makes me an 80s nerd. So I was one of those Stranger Things kids riding around on the BMX, in the backwoods. So that's kind of my background. So introduction to sound. There's a lot to cover here in the amount of time that we have to cover it. So I'm going to throw a lot of concepts at you. Some of it's just going to be like a brain dump. I did have, basically for every one of these subjects, there's deep dive videos that I've made in a document that I'm also going to post to the Discord. Another reason why you want to get to the Discord is that we're only going to be able to cover a surface amount of some of these things, and you're going to have specific questions, and we're not going to be able to cover them all here. So that's a good place to connect and find out more information. But this is what I'm going to try to cover in the next 30 minutes. Introduction to sound, science of hearing. We're going to talk about phase. We're going to talk about sound envelopes. We're going to talk about the decibel. We're going to talk about signal flow basics, preamp and gain, and what those mean. And then we're going to talk a little bit about some of the tools that we use to shape sound as well. So, as I said, it's a brain dump. So if this feels a little overwhelming, I totally get it. But I would encourage you to get onto Discord so you can get those additional materials and follow up on some of those videos on the specific places where you might have gaps or you have more desire to dive in a little bit deeper. So I also really love memes, so you might see an occasional meme in here. So why understanding sound fundamentals why does it matter? Well, bunch of different reasons. Ensuring speech intelligibility is really, really important, right? When we gather a bunch of people together, our goal is to be able to communicate whatever it is that we're asked to communicate very clearly, right? And so, in the case of a church, in a large church like this one, tiny little pastor up there, a bunch of people, and we need to be able to amplify that voice and make it clear and intelligible and make it not distracting. And so that's really important. In this space, it's small enough that we didn't really need to do that, so we're doing it unamplified. So managing acoustical challenges. Some of us have really nice spaces that were built specifically for music performance or for live performance. Others of us are using spaces like gyms and random spaces. And so taking the information we know, we can help. The things that you understand about sound fundamentals will help you craft better experiences in places that have acoustical challenges. So, balancing speech and music is super important. Music especially is the biggest challenge. I think there's a lot going on. It's like playing 5D chess sometimes when you're trying to mix music. And so it's super important to try to balance those two, not make it too loud, not make it too soft, keep the balance, make it transparent. Preventing disruptions. We're all familiar with feedback or static or noise, things like that. These tools will help you understand how to better handle some of those things. We want to enhance a worshipful atmosphere. One of the things I always tell people is that if we're all doing our jobs as sound people, then nobody knows that we're there, right? Where this is one of those thankless jobs sometimes where if we're doing our very best job, the hope is that the people coming in with their expectation has been met, and you're probably not going to get a high five at the end unless you just like did something amazing. So, but that's our job, right? Our job is to enhance what's happening in the room with the message, with the music, and so that people can enter into worship, so that people can learn the gospel better. So, adapting to diverse needs. There's all kinds of challenges that happen from in any situation. Sometimes, like this morning, we threw a lot of stuff together. We did that because we all came from different backgrounds and we knew how to problem solve. It just sort of happens passively. And so that the more you know, the better you can step into a situation and adapt your skills to different needs that you might be stepping into where you don't necessarily have control or time to plan for things. Budget constraints in volunteer training is another reason why these are really important as well. Because if you understand like the tools that you have, you can make better decisions about what you buy, and also how to better train your volunteers on the equipment that you have is also really important too. So we're going to start on the really, really basic concept. What is sound? Sound is energy traveling as mechanical waves through a medium, air, water, created by vibrating objects. The air that we breathe right now is considered a medium. It's full of molecules. When you go out to space, there is no there's no medium for sound to travel through, which is why you always hear the aliens thing. You know, in space nobody can hear you scream, and that's because there's nothing for the sound to travel through. So air is what sound travels through. It can be affected actually by temperature. Cold air, hot air will affect the way that sound happens. If you're in an outside venue, if you have clouds, that will affect the way sounds. We need air in order for sound to travel through. Vibrations push air particles. They collide with their neighbors and they transfer energy forward. We usually visualize these as waveforms to map these pressure changes of high and low, and compressions and rarefactions, low pressure and high pressures. We visualize those as waves. So let's see, science of hearing, and this is kind of we can't see sound obviously, but it's a form of energy just like light. Moves in waves. It has these sections of compression, which are where the sound gets compressed and the molecules are closer together. And then we have the low parts, the rarefaction, where they go. And then we generally visualize it as a wave. And then, from a transmission standpoint, this is a typical interaction where we are putting sound out of a speaker, it's affecting the molecules, and then it's hitting our ear. And then from where that sound goes, this is just like another an example of how that sound travels to where we need it to do. In reverse, the sound pressure waves will hit a diaphragm, and the diaphragm inside of a microphone is not too dissimilar as a speaker. Instead of pushing sound out, it receives sound and it turns those into electrical signals and sends those down the line. So you can, in fact, rewire a pair of headphones or a pair of speakers or a speaker and turn it into a microphone because of the way all of that works. So, and then on the biological side of things, those sound waves hit our auditory systems, our eardrum, and our body turns those sound vibrations into electrical signals that are interpreted by our brain. So. The parts of sound, and as I was mentioning before, you've got, as sound travels through, it has these pressure waves. So we have these periods of high pressure and low pressure. The way we express sound is through pressure, which is kind of the energy, and then we express it through time. So how long does it take, for that sound to travel? And then the pressure represents what we would call volume or gain. And then frequency, high frequency or low frequencies, is how quickly those waves are traveling. So on a piano, for instance, if you were to play a G down here, the waveform would look like it's moving slower, but if you played an octave higher, it's going to move at twice the rate, so that you're going to get faster, and then another octave higher, it's going to get even faster and faster. So the range of human hearing, roughly, we measure it in hertz and kilohertz, and the CPS represents cycles per second. And so that's what we were looking at before, is how many cycles of a high and low. Considered one cycle, it'll be 20 cycles per second or 20,000 cycles per second. And so the general range of human hearing is 20 to 20, 20 hertz being on the low end, 20 kilohertz being on the high end. And just to give you an example of what that sounds like, I'm going to play back a little bit from my Ableton session here. And I'm kind of curious because as I get older, I'm losing some of my high end hearing as it is, and so I'm going to start at the low end and start cranking this up. So this is at 6 hertz, which is below the threshold of hearing. You shouldn't be able to hear that. You almost shouldn't be able to feel it. You can almost, if you get close enough to a speaker, sometimes you can actually see a speaker moving if it's low enough. So the lowest threshold of human hearing is about 20. So I'm going to start it at the bottom. Let me know when you guys start hearing it.
You hear rumble, yeah.
Yeah, you hear that super low end? That's usually what you hear coming out of subwoofers, you know? Let me keep going. This is 80 hertz. This is about roughly where our chest kind of resonates and we start hearing kick drum sounds and things like that.
Where the fun begins?
Yeah, it's where the fun starts. Okay, we're at 200. This is about 1,000 kilohertz. This is one that I like to cut out because it's painful sometimes. I'm going to start hitting the higher threshold. Okay, this is 7 kilohertz.
That's all it is.
And I'm going to keep going. On this speaker system, I've lost it, I think, right about now. I'm not in an optimal place to hear it, but does anybody still hear it? Yep, good. You guys are the future. You guys are going to take my job. That's what I want.
That went away from me.
Anybody else still hearing it? Okay.
A little bit.
Anybody? Okay. 12. That's good.
Oh, that's sad.
I'm going to turn it down a little bit. Okay, we're at 16. Anybody still hearing it? Okay, so that's about where, on a good pair of headphones, where it stops for me too, is about 15 or 16 or something like that. So, so that's the full range of sound that we are working with on a daily basis. Not always, but that's kind of like the full extent of kind of where we go with what we're. That's what we're trying to control. Everything within that range. So as I was saying before, and this is how this is how a sound works. A cycle works. We have, we have the low pressure wave, and we have the high pressure wave, and you notice it looks not too dissimilar from an engine. So like an engine, like a single stroke engine for like a motorcycle or something like that. As you noticed, when you rev a motorcycle, the pitch goes up, and when you throttle off of it, it goes down. A motorcycle is an oscillator. It's a very simple oscillator, but it does make actual sounds. So,
Is the sound still on?
is it still on? Potentially.
It is.
Good, because I can't hear it. So, what did I do?
Hear it, but it was annoying. I could hear a sound, but I could feel the.
It should be off now. Yeah. You might have some compression artifacts. So we're going to talk a little bit about phase. So sound has, because it dips, has low pressure and high pressure. It has phases that it does this, and so one of the phase is one of those things where it seems like, well, I don't really need to know about this stuff, but it's actually something we battle all the time, and this is the reason why. When you have a single sound by itself, it plays out. If you have another sound that's identical to it, and it's in phase, they'll actually double in amplitude. If you have one that's if the same sound and it's out of phase, they'll actually cancel each other out. This is a problem that we experience a lot of times. I experience a lot of times when putting microphones close together. But it can happen all the way across the board because now we don't deal primarily in like very simple waveforms like this. Usually when we're controlling these things, we're playing pianos or guitars, some things that have very rich, like harmonics, very rich waveforms. But the mathematical chances of hitting those frequencies at the same time, all being bussed through one system, are pretty great. So then we end up having phase cancellation issues. And so understanding that is important because that will inform how you treat those things, either through controlling your frequencies or inverting signals or things like that. So, and I actually have an example of what that sounds like. So in Ableton here, I have just a basic synthesizer. So this is just like a basic synthesizer sound. That's the waveform that it's making. If I enable this second channel, it's playing the exact same thing. You'll notice that it's twice as loud. It's because those two signals have summed together and are reinforcing each other, and that makes double the amplitude of that signal. Now, if I turn on this third one here, this third one's playing the exact same thing, but I have now inversed the phase of it so that while the first one has a wave that's going in this way, the other one's got a wave going this way, and they're basically pulling each other to the point where it hits zero, and then you will hear nothing. So you'll see that I have sound here, but we got nothing because the two energies are canceling each other out. So if I pull the volume down for this one, now this one is sort of taking over and it's getting some gain in there. So that's an example of phase. That's the example of something that can potentially happen where it's like, oh, I'm hearing sound, but it doesn't sound right, or it's underpowered, and it could potentially be a problem with phase. So it's really important to understand phase. Yeah.
Noise canceling headphones are doing.
Similarly, yeah, noise canceling headphones do something similar where they're listening to your environment, and it works better with noise specifically than it does with complex things. But if you're in a plane, for instance, it'll listen to the ambient noise of the plane, the air passing over the wings, and then it will take that signal and invert it back into itself, and then it cancels out that noise, so that all you're hearing is your music or your voices. It works with, that's the way Zoom works, and a bunch of other technologies too, where it's cutting out background sounds because it's using phase cancellation to do that as well. So we're going to talk about envelope. So the envelope sound, when we hear a sound, it has an envelope just like what you think is an envelope. It's just a container that you put something in. We talk about this in terms of the stages of sound, which is ADSR. That stands for attack, sustain, or attack, decay, sustain, and release. It's kind of the 4 basic stages of a sound. The attack is the beginning of the sound, the initial transient, as we call it, that determines kind of the sharpness of the sound. And then we have the decay, which is how quickly that sound starts to go away from the time that it reaches its peak. Then the sustain, depending on the instrument, if you have, like, for instance, a piano actually has a sustain pedal, that if you hit a piano note and you release it without hitting the sustain pedal, the sound will go away very quickly. But if you hold the sustain down, it will decay much slower over time, which gives you a more complex expression of the instrument. And then you have release, which is that stage. And so sometimes you'll see attack, decay, and then it just goes straight to release. Like I was saying, like if you're playing a pluck of a violin, or if you're playing a sound on the piano and you're not holding it down, it'll just immediately go to the release. But the release time is how much time it takes it for the sound to go from the peak all the way back down to 0. And I put this out of order. So this is the envelope of a snare drum, for instance. When you hit a snare drum, you have an immediate, very loud attack, sound, transient, and then it very quickly goes away. Bam, it goes away. So that's the shape of a snare drum. Conversely, this is the sound envelope of a violin. A violin's not a percussion instrument; it's a string instrument, and so occasionally you'll see somebody pluck a violin, or like they'll bow a violin, but usually they're making a long sustained sound. In which case, the attack slowly grows to where it gets to its peak, and then it slowly goes off depending on how quickly they pull out of it. So understanding the envelope of a sound is really important for helping shape those things. I'm going to talk about decibels real quick. So the decibel scale is probably something that you're all familiar with. We talk about sound in the decibel scale. It's a really fun, complex math formula that I'm not going to go into today because that's what my brain does when I start thinking about the mathematics behind decibels. But it is a unit of measurement. As you start mixing sound or you start getting involved with things that work with sound, you'll start to get a sense of where your ideal decibel levels are. If it gets too loud, then it's painful. This is what we're trying to avoid is the pain. So here's a diagram, and this is just one of a million diagrams on the internet you can look up. But just look up a decibel scale. Average, it's usually conversations in a room conversation. You know, if you're in a coffee shop, if you're in a quiet room, it might be like about 60. If you're in a coffee shop, it's somewhere around here. If you're at our first service at church, we're somewhere in this range here. And then if you're in one of our more energetic services, we're probably somewhere around here with an occasional, once we hit the bridge, where we hit lower sounds and then we pull back down again. So, but these are sort of equivalents. I don't recommend standing very close to a helicopter, jet engines, or trombones. I don't know why they put trombones on there. Apparently trombones are dangerous. So be careful. I don't know if there's any trombone players out there, but be careful. So yeah, obviously your ears can handle a certain amount of sound pressure level, dB level for a very short period of time, but the longer you sit in it, the more damage you can do. And then likewise, that's damage to the people that you're trying to serve. So we're trying to understand that. Having a dB meter is super helpful. You can get one for your phone. They're not as accurate as getting an actual dB meter, so I encourage you to spend a little bit of money just buying an actual dB meter. And then I'll take measurements in multiple places, and don't take it in just one spot, because some of it is perception, but some of it is about the measurements, and you're not going to get an accurate reading if you're just like in one spot, your little safe spot that you mix from. So next we're going to talk about signal flow. So understanding signal flow is super important. Understanding your system in particular, or understanding how signals traverse is super important. Even if it's your own church or your own space where everything's set up and you don't have to unplug anything, it's important to understand it because technology fails. This is one of my big mantras, is that it's not a matter of when technology fails, it's not a matter of if technology fails, it's when it's going to fail for you. It will fail for you. The second question is, how knowledgeable are you about the system and the technology to be able to fix the problem? Some of that has to do with, do you have replacement cables? Do you have replacement gear? But a lot of it is just like, quickly, I know exactly where that problem point is, that pain point is, I can go solve that. So that's why it's really important to understand signal flow and understand the particulars around it. This is like a pretty common setup for us, like a small band. We might have a guitar, we might have some vocals, we might have a drum set that's all going into a mixer. The mixer allows us to control the levels of those things, bust them all together, and then send them out to different places, destinations. So we might send it out to some mains, we might send it out to some subs for the people in the house or the congregation to hear, and then our band members would like to be able to hear themselves as well. So occasionally we'll send them out to floor wedges or something like that. Or what's more common now is an in-ear system, which I'm a big fan of, so for many reasons. Here's another example of a system and a small board where we would take our individual channels from our different sources, put them in the system, process them, mix them, send them out to some speakers or send them out to some floor wedges. This is your mixer is kind of like the heart of your whole signal flow system. So some key components of that we want to know about microphones, obviously. We use those to capture sound waves. We use those for the speaker to communicate this message. We use them to capture different instruments. Preamp is something good to know about. This is how we take those microphone signals and we boost them to, or instruments, and we boost them to a line level signal. Often, and that preamp is often built into a mixer, but it's not always. Sometimes a guitar rig will have a preamp built into it. There's other places where preamps show up, but mixers almost always have one because we're trying to level things out for sound coming into the mixer. The mixer is the tool that we use. A front of house mixer or a mixing console is what we use to balance and process all of those audio. All the audio comes in. It's not just the audio that comes in, but then how we process that and how we shape all of those things individually to come together to present what we need to hear with our 2 ears. Amplifiers. The amplifiers are used to power passive speakers. So you can sometimes, like the speakers that we have at our church are actually powered speakers. There's amplifiers in the speakers themselves, so we don't have to have a separate amplifier in between that and the speaker, but a lot of systems still do use a full amplifier to take those line level signals that are coming from the mixer, amplify them to a sound level that we can hear, and then send that energy to the speaker so that they can actually be projected out to the congregation or to your viewership. And then I think, the speakers output sound to the audience. So typical mixer signal flow. This is, you'll find a bunch of different mixers have different ways of doing this. Some of them are very flexible in the way that you can order things, but this is a pretty common way. You have your instrument or a microphone input that comes in, and then once that you plug that in, it hits the preamp, which is where you set your level for the instrument. Then you'll have a filter that you can use to cut off some of the nasty low-end stuff that often is represented. Here's the funny, interesting thing about a microphone, is that the microphone doesn't care what it's listening to. So if you have a microphone sitting in a stand and it's sitting on top of the subwoofer, guess what sound you're going to get through your microphone? If it's rattling, that vibration is going to go up through the stand into the microphone, and your microphone is going to capture that. So this is why I use a high pass filter for a lot of things, just to cut out the low end. We don't need all of that. We're not trying to amplify the sound of vibration. We're trying to amplify the sound of somebody's voice or an instrument. So then it'll often hit a gate, which if you have a lot of other noisy cymbals or signals on stage, or if you have something like a guitar that has some line noise or something like that, you can use a gate. I'll explain a little bit about that later, to help control. Basically, it kind of like automatically turns on and off the sound when you need it to, based off of how loud the sound is coming through. Then that helps keep things quiet when it's needed. EQ stands for equalization. We use that primarily to. An EQ is a filter. Or a series of filters, depending. There's lots of different kinds of EQs, but we use that to shape sound. We use that to boost or cut individual sections of frequency or whole swaths of frequency. I'll explain a little bit about that later. And then often you'll see a compressor in line, and then compressor is basically an auto leveler. It's designed to reduce the dynamic range of an instrument that might be too loud, or even a voice. You might get a pastor who's like just whispering really quiet, and then occasionally he just leans in when the Holy Spirit tells him to, right? And the compressor will help. We can raise that sound up, and then when he gets really loud, the compressor will help keep it within a range, so we are not constantly having to turn the fader up and down. The compressor essentially does it for you. So then after it hits all of that stuff, it goes through the mixer, and then the mixer gives us those destinations essentially, right? So we have group outs we can go to. We have matrix mixes that we can use to send to recorders or send them to like the lobby, other places like that. The aux mixes is what we typically use to send to our band members, so that they have discrete control over the levels that they get. so they can be better informed musicians. And then other places, for recording, we can send them to direct outs. If you have a Dante system, you can send them over the network to other locations for live stream or for recording. And then we have our main mix out, which is primarily for the people who are sitting in the auditorium that you're trying to send off to. So signal levels. So these are the three that we're looking at. We have mic level. Those are the weakest signals that we get. So microphones are sensitive and they don't put out a lot of sound. So those need a preamp in order to get it up to a level that can match everything else that we're putting inside of the mixer. Instrument level, between the mic, it's somewhere in between a mic and a line level in terms of what an instrument might be putting out. If you're playing an acoustic guitar, you usually need a direct box to convert from an instrument level up to a line level. So that's essentially adding gain to get it up to a place where we can mix that adequately with everything else. And then we have line level, which is the stronger of all the signals that we use to communicate between mixers and processors and amplifiers. Mixer outputs, playback devices all do things at line level. So the whole point of understanding all of these is that what we plug in is not going to just automatically give you sound. You have to understand a little bit about that thing that you're plugging into the mixer so that you can adequately use the tools you have to try to get your input signals to match. So So I mentioned earlier a preamp. So a preamp or an operational amplifier. A preamp is a device that boosts weak audio signals to a usable level, called a line level. Without a preamp, the signal will be too quiet or noisy. So what will end up happening is if you were just to directly plug a bunch of stuff into a mixer and all of the preamps were set at let's say 3, your microphone might be really, really quiet, but your guitar might be loud, and then your keyboard that you plug in might be super, super loud. And so a preamp, what that does is it lets us control how much of that signal is coming in. Either positively or negatively. So in the case of a microphone, we'll need to crank it up, and we're trying to get it to an optimal level. In the case of maybe a guitar pedal board or something like that, maybe outputting something really high at line level, and we need to bring it down a little bit in order to match those levels so that we can begin to mix. Why do we need preamps? Again, just like I said, we need them to microphones produce weak signals, and they output mic level signals, which are really low. So our preamps are designed to help us bring all those levels up so that we can process things adequately. So if you think about it, a microphone is kind of like a magnifying glass for sound. It captures the tiny sound and it magnifies it so it's big enough to match everything else that you're plugging into. Or it's like turning up the brightness on a dim flashlight so you can see that sound. So you can see that sound a little bit better. So. They'll probably cover some gain staging maybe later on, but I just wanted to touch on it really quick because it is an important concept. Gain staging is something we use all the time. And it's basically that process of plugging all the stuff into the mixer, using your preamps to get everything to a proper gain level. So it's important to do before anybody starts worshiping or anything. You need to have proper gain levels. And setting them at every stage. So, at the mic or the preamp or the mixer to avoid noise or distortion. If you have something that's really hot and it's not set right, you're going to get clipping or you're going to get distortion inside of the system, and that's not good, obviously. Or if you have something that is really quiet and it's cranked up too loud, you're going to get every piece of gear that you plug into anything has a bit of line noise to it. Some of them are more noticeable than others, and which is why we need to understand the tools that we're plugging into things and also how to combat those things and how to shape those things. So again, too much gain causes clipping distortion. Too little gain causes noise. When you crank the volume up later, all of a sudden you're like, why is it hissing so loud? And it's because something is likely not gain staged properly. So the goal is to keep our signals strong and clean without overloading any components. So gain staging is prevention. So we fix issues at the source, at the preamp, not downstream. So we don't ask the guitar player later on in the middle of practice to go adjust things there. Before we get started, everybody gets gain stage so that we all start out at a nominal level. Using your meters are your friend. So when you're as you're gain staging, you can see the signal that's coming in. Yellow or orange is okay. Red is bad. I think we all understand how red is bad. In all throughout life, red is generally bad. So red means you're clipping, so we don't want to do that. So, and it's better to be. I would say to err on the side of caution. It's better to be a little on the quieter than it is to be a little too loud, because when I gain stage people, I usually tell them, give me your hottest patch, play me the most active part of the song you're going to play, because that's what I want to base my sound on, and then I try to keep it somewhere just underneath where my, just because in the middle they might hit a boost and all of a sudden they're going for it, or the drummer who's doing a warm up, all of a sudden gets the Holy Spirit and just digs into that, right? And then all of a sudden you've got these louder sounds. So erring on the side of caution is a little bit better when it comes to gain staging. And again, you can always adjust it later. So sound shaping fundamentals. I put this in here because it has nothing to do with sound shaping fundamentals. I just like it. It's the weirdest GIF I could find, actually. So we're going to talk a little bit about sound shaping. Are essentially the effects that we use to help shape sound as it goes into our system. So we use dynamic effects, frequency-based effects, distortions, time-based effects, and modulation. We don't use all of these, but these are all common ones. Common dynamic effects would be, as I mentioned before, compression. We're trying to control the dynamics, right? We're trying to control how quiet or soft things can be, and we're trying to reduce how active that can be within a certain range. Sometimes we do it for the sake of controlling volumes. Other times we're doing it because there's an artistic endeavor behind it. We're trying to, there's a nice sound that comes out of using compression. Limiting is kind of like compression, but instead of working bottom up, it actually kind of works top down is the way I look at it. It's like a brick wall, essentially. A limiter, what you usually do is you set where you want your target sound to be, and then you use the controls to help anything that gets fed into the limiter based off of how you set it won't get any louder than the control that you set it. So this prevents clipping as well. This a lot of times you'll get amplifiers now that have a limiter built into it, so you can't, if you crank it up too loud, instead of blowing an amplifier or blowing a speaker, it'll clip. It just literally will not get any louder for you. Some of them will actually cut out like volume completely, and others just start sounding really squishy. But it's a safety feature, right? We're trying not to kill people's ears, not to trying to kill any gear. And then gating. Gating is another tool that we use to control dynamics. I mentioned that earlier. Gates we use to, it's an effect that's literally like a gate. It opens and closes. It has some other settings built into it, but it's designed to turn the channel on when the volume gets to a certain loudness, and then turn the channel off when it gets below a certain volume. And that can mean when you're playing a snare drum, it's completely quiet. When you hit the snare drum, it opens the gate, the sound of the snare comes through. When the snare is done, it closes the gate, and you have a silent channel instead of it being open the entire time and you're hearing all of the other instruments bleed into it, or you're hearing line noise. So that's a useful tool as well. So spectral frequency effects, another common one we use. EQ, as I mentioned before, there's lots of different kinds of EQs, but the general idea is that they're used to control those frequencies that I talked about earlier, the full range of frequencies, where oftentimes we just need to cut things out, or we need to boost things a little bit, or you get a singer who has like a really nasally sounding. You need to pull out just that part of the sound, but you don't want to pull the entire channel down. So our goal with an EQ is to help shape the sounds that are coming through that channel. There are dynamic EQs. An example of that would be a de-esser or like a feedback killer. A de-esser is basically an EQ that's targeted at making S sounds. And so what it does is it listens for sounds that come in through that frequency that we use to say S's, and it automatically dips it down whenever it hears that one. Everything else is unaffected, but just gets pulled out. So that's a useful tool. And feedback killers work in the same way, where it'll listen to your audio signal, and as soon as you start getting feedback in a certain area, it says, oh, I'm going to pull that down for you automatically. So that's an example of a frequency tool. Then we have distortion effects. We don't typically use these in the mixing situation, but it's good to understand them. Distortion types are typically what you see guitar players or bass players use inside their instruments to add texture or to add additional expression to their instruments. I occasionally use it when I'm doing studio work because adding, depending on how the type of distortion you use, you can create additional harmonic content across the frequency spectrum that wasn't there. So sometimes adding just a little bit of distortion to like a vocal or something like that will actually make it sound more rich. And there's different kinds. You've got like straight up distortion. You've got saturation, which is where you're taking the full bandwidth of the sound and you're pushing it up through an effect that saturates all the frequencies and makes it sound kind of crunchy. You got overdrive. If you're a guitar player or a bass player, you're probably familiar with how overdrive works. But you're taking the signal and you're driving it over a transformer or a tube or something like that, and that gives a specific character of sound out of that piece of gear. I already covered that. I don't know why that's in there again. Time-based effects. So time-based effects means that it's effect that affects time of the signal that you're putting into it, stretching it out or creating copies of it. Reverb is obviously a common one. If you're trying to recreate the space of a room or you're trying to add texture to a voice or something like that, it's common to put a reverb in there. Sometimes I like to put too much reverb in there for vocals. Delays are good if anybody's a fan of U2 and you like, Where the Streets Have No Name. That's all delay guitar that's in there that's taking his little tick, 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 and then making it repeat over and over and over again. That's something that gets used as a creative tool. I don't know why. Maybe, it was really late when I was finishing these slides. I think I might have just not taken some out. Yeah. Echo is very similar to delay. It's actually kind of a combination of what I would consider a combination of delay and reverb in that it's creating repeats of sounds, but it's also doing it and trying to recreate a bit of space inside of that sound as well. Then we have modulation effects. Modulation effects, these are some of my favorite ones where you process a sound through a modulator and it produces a result that kind of enriches the signal that you put through it. So a common one would be like a chorus, and essentially what it's doing is it takes the sound that comes in and it splits it, and then it will do things to one of the two signals. Sometimes it'll split it into a bunch of different versions of it, and then maybe pitch them up or down, or maybe slow them down or speed them up a little bit, play them all through the same time. And the result of those, actually, some of those, like a chorus or flanger or phaser, actually take advantage of the phasing problem that I talked about before, and use that as a creative tool to create whooshing sounds or sounds, because what it's doing is it's sending copies of the sound through a unit, and as the time gets modulated or the speed gets modulated, the frequencies cross over each other and they start phasing in and out and canceling each other out, and it creates kind of a really cool effect. And if you, what I like to do is like to put one of these on and then put it like a delay after it, or put a reverb after it, so then you have some washy sounds, some washy creative modulation sounds that go into a reverb, which kind of creates a nice big space. Tremolo works in a similar way, except that it doesn't typically split a signal. It basically, what it does is kind of like it automatically levels the signal that goes into it. So if you were to have a guitar coming through and you sat there with the fader and you went like this and turned it up and down rapidly, that's basically what a tremolo does. It has a piece of technology in it that just automatically, at a specific rate that you set it to, will automatically turn the volume up or down, or it might pan it left and right. That's another example of something it might do. And then vibrato, it works in a similar way, but instead of just turning the volume up and down, it also turns the pitch up and down a little bit too. So instead of just having a note that's straight, you might get so in the same way that a human voice does vibrato, where we modulate our vocal cords to create vibrato. It does that in an instrument artificially. And that's literally Finn, and also the end of my presentation. So, like I said, there's a whole lot in there. I actually had a whole Ableton session where I went through all of examples of what all of those effects sound like. We just don't have the time to do it. So, but I do have deep dive videos on all of those, including ones that go through every single type of those effects, so you can kind of get familiar with them. And I'd encourage you to learn, even if you're not playing an instrument, learn all of that stuff, because it does inform how you approach mixing other people or how to be creative in our space. Because our job as sound engineers is not just to recreate the sound; it's also to be creative in that space. Like we're created to be creative in that space, and so. I encourage you to learn all those things to help shape the sound better, and also to help express yourself as a creative person behind the mixer. So that's it. Questions?
When you were talking about safe sound levels and how many dB is too high, does it depend on the frequency and?
Yeah. So sound level meters take an average reading of the sound that is coming out of a speaker. If you solo out that instrument, then you're getting a more accurate representation of what that is. Also, on most mixers, there's an RTA, which is a real-time analyzer that tells you more specifically about the sound, the shape of the sound, the frequency shape of the sound that's coming through those. So that's another good tool to use. But yeah, it is. There are scales, that are built into sound level meters, and depending on how you set them. And again, I don't have time to go into them, but there's a video that I posted there that goes into what the different weighting scales are for sound level meters, and like low energy sound, like from a subwoofer, you can get much higher levels without annoying people than say 300 hertz, which is a pain pressure level for somebody. And so yeah, it does. The different sound, where our ears have desirable and undesirable places where we like to hear things, and that's part of our job, is to help craft sounds so that we're not causing people pain. So
Well, I mean, if I'm mixing, how do I know I'm not causing anyone to go deaf? That's my
yeah. So I mean, yeah, you don't really have that ability. Our goal is to try to keep it within a certain range. And then again, some of that is, here's the other part of too, and I didn't really touch on any of this, but we all have biases. This is one of the things as a challenge as somebody who mixes, is we all have biases. There's certain kinds of music we like to listen to. When I'm in my car, I will roll my windows down and I'll crank on synthwave, and I'll just crank it and just go. I like that, but I can't do that. I can't do that in church, because I'm not trying to craft that sound for me. I'm trying to craft it for somewhere, anyone between 20 and 60 or 70 or something, like whoever's our demographic. If I were at a concert full of young kids, I could probably get away with cranking the sound up to 95, but I can't do that for a church service, not on a regular basis. So some of that is subjective, right? Some of that is looking at numbers and trying to hit specific targets that that are safe, like I gave you that diagram. But part of it is also just getting a sense of what's appropriate for the space and the sound that's in your congregation, what they're trying to go for. And I ask people all the time, is that too loud? Is it too quiet? And I don't know. Sometimes when I mix things really loud, if I cut the right frequencies, it measures really loud, but I get no complaints. And actually, what's really funny is Ashley has a little thing on her Apple Watch that says if the sound has gotten too loud, and if I crank it really loud and I don't get anything from her that says it's too loud, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna keep doing it. So
Do you use A-weighted or C-weighted?
I use A-weighted on the one, and again, some of that is learning the tool, what's more appropriate for your particular situation. In that our room only sits 240, something like that. It's a small room. So I've just learned to use, I know what the target is for myself. I'm not trying to hit a specific number, but I do know if I carry it around into a specific spot, I know where the hot spots are. So it's not even so much about where that is. It's more I know this is a safe range, and this is telling me that it's a safe range. So, I mean, to me, it's a little bit like Fahrenheit and Celsius, right? I mean, they're completely different, but if you know one and you know the reference for the other, then I think you could probably use one or the other. So.
Yeah, I noticed on the diagram there was a little mark that said legal action. We're talking lawsuits could happen if there's damage beyond that?
So in my experience, some cities, it just depends on the city ordinance. Like some cities for an outside concert have a noise ordinance that specifically says no sound after 10 o'clock. Some of them say no sound over a certain volume. They actually will put like a decibel level on there, to which my combat is like, from where? Where did you guys get this level from? Because if you want a 60 decibel reading, I'm gonna walk to the other side of this city block and then as far away as I can get it to try to attain that. And so some of that's important to get some specificity around what that means. So
If you look at workplace, this is where most of the study is done in dB, it'll have exposure time to a certain dB level.
Yep.
And so that's why you have a transient one that's perfectly acceptable to have over your limit, like the kick drum or something
Right.
hits significantly.
It's so quick that it goes away.
That it doesn't matter, but it's really the average sustained volume over a period of time.
Yep.
Which I think is worth knowing.
Yes. Yeah, and again, it wasn't really on that scale, but that's, again, if you dive into that one of those videos, it does talk about prolonged exposure to sound and the dangers of that.
You said that you had several videos that you didn't have time to go over.
Yes.
Where are those videos?
Yeah, so I have them all in the document. If you want, you can just contact me and I'll email them to you, but I'm planning on posting them to the Discord too. It'll be a document that has links that'll take you places. So.
Post that email with all the presentations.
Yeah.
and the videos.
Yeah, so we'll also have my slides as well as we're recording all this too, just so you guys know. If you missed everything, that's the other reason why I'd like scooting through this is a little bit better. But you can also go back and watch these later. Use those to deep dive into the individual subjects that I talked about, and then we'll have recordings. I'll also be posting my PowerPoint as well as my notes too. So if you want to go back through and follow up with any of that stuff, all those resources will be there as well.
So what's the difference between an aux and a matrix? I was setting up the board at church, and it feels like they're exactly the same. One is just labeled matrix, and the other is.
It really is, yeah. Okay. It's just another set of options for you to send to. You could use a matrix out to send to. You could use a matrix as a DCA. You could use it as an aux mix. It's just another set of outputs that you can use, and usually they'll have. Depending on your mixer, will have specific outputs. That's one of the things that really differentiates a lot of mixers from each other is like how much I/O do you have, how many inputs do you have, and how many outputs do you have, and how flexible are you to create whatever it is you need to create. And so some mixers don't even have matrix outs, they just have an aux, or they only have a couple of auxes, or I don't know, some of them don't have inserts, or like there's all kinds of different things. And so that would be more of a deep dive into your specific instrument. But one of these guys could probably answer that. If you have a specific application that you're trying to get to, they could probably point you in the right direction on how to craft something to take advantage of that. So, yeah. Anybody else?
Gain staging, sometimes it's hard to get vocalists to sing right at 6 a.m.
Yes.
When I get your loudest
Yep.
note, is there any tips to get that? Do you like maybe do it after they've done maybe a first warm-up song?
Yeah, I mean, you can gain stage while you're going. The danger of gain staging while they're rehearsing is that if they're setting their own in-ears, you're increasing that gain level for literally everybody. So if they've set things, that's the danger. That's why I encourage you to do it up front. And yeah, that is a challenge. It's the same thing with guitar players. Sometimes you'll be like, hey, they're plunking around with something. I'm like, no, give me your big sound. No, like lay into the kick drum. I know you're maybe not going to get there, but I want to know like where the upper limit of this, so I know I have a range to work in. But this last time not this week, but the previous week, I had some singers that were like, because they get embarrassed because they're just singing by themselves. And one of the things I'm going to try this next time I do it is to have the piano player play with them, because they're so exposed trying to sing whatever choruses that they have up there. And it's kind of embarrassing. So then you get this timid output. So that's one thing that could be a challenge, to say, how do we run them through that pre-check in a way that's comfortable, that gets you to the goal, and get them on board with that whole process as well.
I like that piano idea.
Yeah.